sitting here at lunch. I got out late, so I'm not due back for another 20 minutes or so. And I don't want to go. So on the weekend, we went to the water park. I told you about that. Basically, I worked 7-8 hours on that day. I worked some hours in the morning before we had breakfast and after breakfast. And then we went out, did something. I can't remember. But when I came back and I did some more remote work from home. And working on a project that I was having to put things on and it would run for a long time. And then when I came home from the water park, I got stuck into finishing it off. And I thought I had it working. And then I had a bright idea. Because we basically had a mission to get accomplished. And then there was like an extended mission to see if we could accomplish. And when I say we, I mean me, actually, in this case, but my section at work. But I was doing all the work this weekend. And I had a pretty good feel that I could make this work. I was wrong. And I ended up spending most of Sunday working on it, fighting with it. It's a Microsoft Exchange problem. It's more than that. It's a Microsoft Exchange and networking problem. And I fought until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night last night. And I finally got it. I had to make some compromises, but I finally got it working. I wouldn't have quit last night. Even though it was 10:30, I wouldn't have quit last night if I'd had any doubts that it was working properly. I was able to send and receive mail. I was able to connect from the webmail. I was able to connect from Outlook. It all looked good. Came in this morning. I got up this morning, checked it again, because paranoid. And got into work. And one of my staff uses both a Mac and a PC. Most of us just use most of us in IS use Macs. We all have them, anyway. And his Outlook worked on the Mac, but it did not work on Windows. And then we started getting calls from the early birds coming in. Nobody could connect with Windows Outlook. What the hell's up with that? Well, to make a long story short, eventually we tracked the problem down to Windows having confusion with having two network cards in different subnets. Which, it would give you this kind of vague sort of, this might not work the way you think it's going to work. Well, it doesn't work at all. They shouldn't even allow you to turn it on in that case. Because as soon as we got rid of that, everything got fixed. But, and I want to emphasize this, it's always been there. It's just that owing to circumstances beyond our control, we have to change our IP addresses. And we needed to change part of the server, because it's got multi-facets, part of it to be our internal network and part of it to be an external network. And that was where the problem was. Previously, it was all internal network. And so we were without email for hours this morning, which is... the staff doesn't deal with that well, I have to say. And I have been pulling 5 G's of stress since around lunchtime yesterday. And so, yeah, I had to disable webmail completely and no one can use it, and so sorry, tough shit. But mail is working internally and calendaring, and we're not broken in the office. And so I can calm down, have some food, drink a Dr. Pepper, talk to you. But I have to go back. And now I have to come up with an entirely new scenario for getting webmail online, which I hope does not involve setting up a second Exchange server and federating them, because that would suck for such a, for 80 users. That's just nuts. I'm going to look into a reverse proxy server first and see if we can make something like that work. It's got to be easier. Oh well, back we go. Hello! Today I am going to be tasting this special dumpling, which has been made with meatloaf inside, because it's fusion food. The combination of two cultural icons put together in new and exciting ways. The question is it wonderful or is it awful? There can be no in-between. Normally I would eat with chopstick, but fork is more efficient. It's a bit solid with a nice crispy brown bottom, but it does have an unusual sort of reddish tint to it, as does the meatloaf, made in the same material. So here we go. I will not be opening a new fusion dumpling meatloaf meat restaurant anytime soon, but it does give me some thoughts. Like, why did I think this would be a good idea? I do not know. It's just a thing. Get the mark. Thank you.
What's with the accent?
Accent? What are you talking about?
The accent.
Before I was talking with accent. Now I am talking normal. This is one of those rare circumstances where I'm going to run this out of order, because I can see that it doesn't make any sense when I tried editing together. So the next section you're going to see actually occurred before this. But this happened after what you just saw with the meatloaf dumpling. But basically, my wife made dumplings the other day. We talked about this when we went to Cho's kitchen. And I wanted to try their dumplings because the recipe that she had, it's not her, it's this recipe, right? Just, it wasn't bad, but it just didn't taste, like, that's a good thing inside a noodle kind of thing. So I wanted to try it with that in mind, and then say to myself, well, what is it that this recipe needs? And that requires us to go out and get ground pork. And I had an idea, because you can make all sorts of dumplings. Don't get me wrong. When you go to Taiwan, they have curry dumplings, and they have other nasty dumplings that I wouldn't eat. So I can't think of what they are. But it's not just, pot stickers are not just the pork and cabbage and ginger things. They can be made, and I think curry dumplings would probably be pretty good. But trying to get the basic dumpling right first. And that's what I had in mind. But the problem is that Chuan thinks that American pork doesn't have the right flavor. And how can we determine that? It's impossible. But also, any restaurant here is not getting pork from Taiwan. So it is American pork. It is possible. We don't know what the parameters are that are different. We think it's that it's not as fatty. Anyway, we have a meatloaf recipe that's very good. It's not I mean, we didn't invent it, but we have this meatloaf recipe that we've used. It's very good. Of course, normally it uses ground beef instead of ground pork, but you can certainly make it with ground pork, and I did. And the reason I did that is I wanted to have a baseline reference in my mind as to how different ground pork and ground beef taste in something that I know is an adulterated meal, right? So the meatloaf is going to have tomato sauce, it's going to have oats, it's going to have some spices, and so that's why we made the meatloaf. And while we were making the meatloaf, I said, well, what the heck, let's just chop a little bit off, throw it in a couple of dumpling wrappers, and cook them up and see what we get. And that's what you just saw. And it wasn't very good. But to be fair, the meatloaf itself was a little dry, which is probably because the pork is a less fat ratio than we always buy the fattiest ground beef we can when you're making a meatloaf, and you just pour the fat off when you're done cooking the grease, but it makes it juicier and tastes better. So what I did with this was, now today it was an attempt to make legitimate dumplings. And so, looking at this basic recipe, it's ground pork, it's some cabbage, it's some green onion, it's some garlic, some ginger, and sesame oil, soy sauce, salt, pepper, sake. So based on what I tasted the other day and what I tasted at Joe's Kitchen, my mind was, I think it's the soy or salt. I think it's more ginger and more onion. And so I altered the recipe, but also it was definitely juicier. So you can make pork gelatin by taking pork bones and cooking them for hours and skimming the stuff off the top. But what I decided to try was taking gelatin, unflavored gelatin, and pork broth that we have, and combining that and making a gelatinous mass, which we'd again add to the meat before encasing it in the dumplings. And that actually kind of worked. They were definitely juicier. It may have been a little too much for the amount that we cooked, but then that was trial and error. And then I made some other adjustments. And so this is how that turned out. Well, this is our dumpling half chef.
Yay! Dumplings!
We've taken the recipe that she got online, and after the analysis we did the other day at Joe's Kitchen, I've made some modifications to the internal ingredients. Once having made the internal meat filling, then I turned that over to the dumpling maker to make dumplings with them. And now we are going to try the dumplings. Alright, so this is the test dumpling. This is the test dumpling sauce. We're going to dump the dumpling in the dumpling sauce. Then we're going to eat the dumpling. Maybe?
Does it taste like a dumpling?
Not bad. That's not bad.